When my husband died, the house became too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until your own thoughts feel loud and unkind. For 32 years this home had been full of his voice, confident, sometimes stubborn, always certain of where he was going. He built his business from nothing, brick by brick, deal by deal. I stood beside him, unseen by most but essential. When the funeral ended and the condolences stopped, reality arrived with sharp teeth. His children came a week later. Not to grieve, not to remember their father, but to talk. They sat across from me at the long dining table, the same table where their father once celebrated his first big contract. Their faces were polite, rehearsed. The eldest cleared his throat and said what they had already decided. They wanted the estate, the business, everything. They said it like it was only logical, like I was a temporary caretaker who had overstayed her welcome. I didn't argue. I listened. Inside something hardened, not with anger but with clarity. They spoke about entitlement, about bloodlines, about how their father would have wanted it this way. None of them mentioned the nights I stayed awake balancing books, the sacrifices, the years I put my own dreams aside. I nodded as if I agreed, even as their words cut deep. That afternoon I called my lawyer. He arrived the next day, carrying thick folders in righteous indignation. He told me I had rights, strong ones. He said the will was outdated, that I could fight, that I should fight. He warned me they would try to erase me. His voice rose with urgency, but mine stayed calm. I told him something that made him stare at me like I had confessed to a crime. I said I wanted to give it all to them. He begged me to reconsider. He said grief was clouding my judgment. He said people would think I had lost my mind. I smiled, tired but certain. I told him to prepare the paperwork. When he left, the quiet returned, but it no longer felt empty. It felt deliberate. That night, alone in the bedroom I once shared with my husband, I whispered to the darkness that I knew exactly what I was doing. The days leading up to the hearing passed slowly, like time itself was testing my resolve. Word spread quickly. Friends called, distant relatives suddenly remembered my number, all asking the same question disguised in concern. Was I really giving everything away? Some spoke softly, others bluntly accused me of weakness. I listened, thanked them, and changed the subject. No one understood because no one knew the full story. At night, memories surfaced uninvited. I remembered the early years of the business when we lived in a cramped apartment, when failure hovered close. My husband had the vision, but I had the discipline. I handled contracts, negotiated quietly, noticed things others missed. Over time, I learned more than anyone realized. I learned how assets were structured, how debts were hidden, how ownership could shift with the right words in the right order. The children returned once more before the hearing. This time they were friendlier, confident. They brought coffee, asked about my health, spoke as if the matter was already settled. Their smiles were wide, relieved. I matched their tone and thanked them for coming. When they left, I could almost hear them celebrating in the driveway. My lawyer came again, still hoping I would change my mind. He laid out scenarios, warned me of future regret. I let him speak until his voice faded. Then I told him I trusted him to do exactly what I asked. His shoulders sagged, but he nodded. Professionals respect certainty, even when they don't agree with it. The night before the hearing, I slept deeply for the first time since my husband's death. No dreams. No regrets. Just rest. In the morning I dressed carefully, choosing simplicity over drama. At the courthouse people stared. Whispers followed me down the hall. The children sat together, confident, their lawyer beside them, already flipping through documents. My lawyer avoided my eyes, like he was attending a funeral of his own making. As I took my seat I felt a strange calm. This wasn't surrender. It was timing. The hearing began like any other, formal, predictable, dull. Legal language filled the room, words stripped of emotion. The judge reviewed the estate, the outdated will, the agreements tied to the business. Everything unfolded exactly as expected. When it was my turn to speak, I said little. I confirmed my intention. I acknowledged my understanding. My voice did not shake. The children watched me closely, searching for cracks. They found none. Their lawyer smiled, confident in his preparation. He had reviewed the documents they believed would make them wealthy overnight. He leaned back, satisfied, waiting for signatures that would end the matter forever. When the final papers were placed in front of me, the room felt suspended. Pens were handed out. Cameras clicked softly from the back. This was the moment everyone would remember. I signed where I was told, my handwriting steady. Page after page I signed away the estate, the business, the properties. Each signature felt lighter than the last. The children smiled openly now. Relief, triumph, greed, all of it visible. One of them even let out a quiet laugh. My lawyer looked defeated. The judge nodded, preparing to close the case. Then their lawyer began to read the final clause aloud. His voice slowed. His brow furrowed. He stopped, went back, read it again. The color drained from his face. The smile vanished. He straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. The children leaned forward, confused. He cleared his throat and continued reading, his tone strained. Condition. One they had overlooked. One buried deep within the transfer documents, perfectly legal, perfectly binding. Ownership transferred, yes, but control was another matter entirely. The room shifted. Whispers turned sharp. The judge leaned forward. My lawyer looked up, eyes wide. For the first time I allowed myself a small smile. The children didn't understand at first. They whispered urgently to their lawyer, voices tense. He avoided their eyes, focused on the papers that now betrayed him. The clause was clear. The business, while transferred to them, was bound by a long-standing operational trust, one that I controlled. Profits, decisions, and authority would remain locked unless specific conditions were met. Conditions their father and I had crafted years ago, quietly, after a family argument that showed us exactly what kind of people they were becoming. The judge asked if everyone understood the terms. Silence followed. Their lawyer tried to object, but there was nothing to object to. The documents were valid. Filed years earlier. Untouchable. The smiles were gone now. One of the children stood up, angry, accusing me of manipulation. I met his eyes calmly and told him this was what his father wanted. The judge restored order, reminding everyone that emotions didn't change contracts. Outside the courtroom, chaos followed. Accusations flew. My lawyer finally found his voice, demanding answers from me. I told him the truth, that I had never intended to give them power, only responsibility. I had given them exactly what they asked for, nothing more. They owned the business, yes, but they couldn't sell it, couldn't strip it, couldn't run it into the ground. Any violation would revert everything to the trust. My trust. Their lawyer walked away without a word. The children stared at me like strangers. In that moment they finally saw me, not as an obstacle, not as a foolish widow, but as someone they had underestimated. I left the courthouse alone. The air felt lighter. Justice didn't always shout. Sometimes it waited. The weeks that followed were turbulent. The children tried everything: meetings, threats, public pressure. They accused me of betrayal, of deception. I ignored the noise. The trust operated smoothly, just as it always had. Employees remained secure. Clients stayed loyal. The business continued without disruption, untouched by greed. Privately I mourned. Not for the estate or the money, but for the family that never truly existed. My husband had hoped his children would grow into responsibility. Instead, they chased inheritance like a prize. He and I had planned for this possibility long ago, quietly protecting what mattered most. One evening my lawyer visited again, this time with admiration instead of doubt. He told me it was one of the smartest legal strategies he had ever seen. I told him it wasn't strategy, it was preparation. The children eventually stopped calling. Their anger cooled into silence. They had what they wanted on paper, but none of the control they craved. Over time some of them learned. Others walked away. I stayed exactly where I belonged. Years passed. The business grew stronger, guided by principles rather than entitlement. New leaders rose through merit. The trust ensured stability, fairness, and accountability. I watched from a distance, no longer burdened, no longer invisible. Occasionally I thought of my husband. I imagined his quiet satisfaction, his knowing smile. We had built something together, not just wealth but a safeguard against arrogance. One of the children reached out eventually. Not for money, not for power, but for understanding. We talked. Not as enemies, not as family, but as people shaped by different choices. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was honest. That was enough. People still tell the story, though they get it wrong. They say I was weak then clever. That I lost my mind then revealed my genius. The truth is simpler. I knew who I was. I knew what I had built. And I knew when silence was more powerful than resistance. I never fought because I never needed to. When I signed those papers, I didn't give everything away. I gave them exactly what they deserved. A lesson written in ink and patience. And in doing so, I finally claimed something for myself. Peace.